Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in John chapter 5. Now, last time I revisited a issue because and I'm getting ready to comment on where I kind of got off in a moment. But in looking at that, I was responding to a dear brother, a pastor who took issue with my explanation of verse 2 that when Jesus went to the pool of Bethesda, that's I think the proper pronunciation of the word. I've been butchering it, but anyway, um, and how I said that that phrase that the angel, the reason that the crowd was gathered around, these large crowd of sick people, is that as the story was being told, that an angel from time to time would come down and stir the waters. And then when people would see the waters stirred, they would rush into the water, and whoever rushed into the water was healed. And so, and of course, Jesus, and I'm going to go back to the story. Now, before I go back to the story, um, uh, that story about the angel going stirring the water is in brackets. And as I said, when you see the brackets, here it is in verse 2, actually verse 3, um, within these large number lays blind, lame, paralyzed. And then you see the brackets there. It means that section wasn't in certain manuscripts. And you have to understand the manuscripts to understand why we have English translation. We kind of took issue with that. Now, one part of that, I believe he is a King James person. Not a King James only necessarily, but he certainly, I think he reads from the King James. And there are a lot of people in the King James, the brackets are not there. Now, understand that the King James was translated from a certain manuscripts. And again, I'm not going to take the time to go through the whole manuscripts issue, okay? But anyway, the reason why I took a little more time to just give a brief overview of that was because of Jesus' encounter then with this man, verse 5. One man had been sick for 38 years. And the reason why this story caught me here, he'd been sick for 38 years. Okay, and this is kind of where we left off, and I'm going to pick it up here. But this man had been sick for 38 years. What's interesting about the story is even though people could see, witness miracles, in this man's case, he experienced a miracle. He was healed. Jesus said, well, do you want to get well? And then the man went through well, nobody's, want to help me into the pool, yada, yada, yada. Jesus said, get up, pick up your mat. The man did. He was healed. And then Jesus tells them, and this is kind of odd. Look down at verse number 14. And no, let me go back because, I'll read verse 14. He says in verse 14, look at the red letters. He says, so see, you are well. Do not sin anymore so that something worse doesn't happen to you. What's interesting about this statement, why is Jesus making this statement to this man? Why is Jesus making this statement to this man? He makes the statement. The other time we're going to see the statement that is made is in chapter 8 here with the woman taken in adultery, which that story is also in question. I'll wait till we get there to revisit that again. He tells her, go and sin no more. Of course, in her case, we know what her sin is. Her actual sin was she was caught in the act of adultery. So we know what her sin is. This man, we don't know what he sinned, but Jesus basically said, sin no more, right? Do not sin anymore, which means that the reason why he was in the condition has to do with some kind of sin. Okay, so go sin no more, that something worse doesn't happen to you. Now that kind of, to me, gives kind of a insight into this man's character, because now let's go back. Here's a man, Jesus heals him. He experienced a miracle, but doesn't change. How do we know? You go back to verse number 10, I'm going to say 10, but look at the first sentence. It says, now that day was the Sabbath. Okay, that day was the Sabbath. And this is going to be one of the Jews, the Pharisees, pet peeves. So the Sabbath day, okay, let me go back and read the story so that we can kind of come back up here. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda, okay, in Hebrews, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the sick, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water, because an angel would go down into the pool from time to time and stir up the water. Then the first one who got in after the water was stirred up recovered from whatever ailment he had. Okay. One man was there who had been sick for 38 years, and when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said, do you want to get well? Sir, the sick man answered, I don't have a man to put me into the pool when there is water. When the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, someone else go down ahead of me. Now it's kind of hard to see what is the idea, what this man is saying right here. When I say this, I mean people. What I'm going to say is people certainly believe that this, and let me just be clear again, because I didn't make my point like I wanted to. I wasn't saying that I did not believe the story or not. In fact, let me just say, when you look at this man, even though the brackets here, okay, from verses 3 to 5, that the angel came down and stirred, all basically the brackets is saying that this phrase is not in the original manuscript. And here's one of the reasons why many of the translators leave the story in, okay? This is one of the reasons why, is because even if you take the issue of the brackets away, you still had the issue that the man was crowded around this pool, that they believed, right, that an angel would come down. Also, the man here is saying the water is stirred. Okay, the water is stirred. So, in other words, the phrase is in question. However, the fact that these people are around here, and then what the man is saying is that there's some stirring going on. I just don't get to it in time. So again, that's, all right. And this is also another good Bible lesson here in terms of how we can interpret this story, unlike the Matthew story about the bodies coming out and appearing to many, appearing to many people. Okay, so the fact that when you have this story here, let's go back, kind of drawn back into it again. This is a good way, and this is how, in a sense, too, I process. that, okay, this story doesn't bother me that it's in the Bible. And my reasoning is that because it's certainly not something that God, in preserving his word, was concerned about it. And so even if we wanted to say to the Matthew story, let me go there because I didn't kind of get back off into this. And let me just say, I just think these are important too, because the reason why I kind of address them is because um, there are many people who are there are many people under the guidelines of what is called deconstructing. That's just a kind of common word today. Deconstructing has always been around. Not, people have been leaving the faith. There is a famous, and by the way, biblical scholar that says, and that's very misleading because he is an anti-biblical scholar. Okay, he is an anti-biblical scholar. So, um, so, um, and the whole point is to dismantle Scripture, to show to show how the Bible is fake. That's his thing. His name is Bert Armers. And so, like I say, he's a biblical scholar. And you'll find that there's a lot of people out there under the guidelines of biblical studies. Okay? So they will tell you, I have a master's degree in biblical studies. That is not to be confused in any way with true believer. Okay? Because their aim is not understanding God's word. Their aim is to kind of show you that the Bible isn't what we believe it to be. That's their purpose. All right. So, in this here, I'm going to skip to verse 51. And then he says, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent from twain, from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Verse 9. Now, what's interesting here is you don't see no brackets in this particular. No, that's not what. Let me go back to. I'm still in the King James. Let me go back to. Here we go. All right. So let me go back. Let's see. Verse 50 says, and again, there's no brackets here, which is in. Let me see if there's anything here. All right. Anyway, there's usually some kind of notation, but look what it says. Jesus shouted again, verse 51. Suddenly the curtain of the sanctuary was split in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked and the rocks were split. Now get this, verse 52. The tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Okay, this right here is very suspect for several reasons. What bodies, what saints, who did they appear to? And again, there is no other mention of this story, this phrase here. Now, unlike what we're reading in John chapter 5, we have within the passage itself, right, some validation. Here, none. Now, at the same time, this doesn't hurt anything. Notice what it says, that he gives a parenthetical. The tombs were open and many bodies of the saints had fallen asleep. And then it says they came out of the tombs after his resurrection. So this event here happened after the resurrection. And then it says, and they entered the holy city and appeared to many. So that statement, I would say, is very suspect. Did this actually happen? So then the other question would be, if it didn't happen, why is it here? We can even go and say, why did God allow it to be here? So the one thing could be, well, okay, maybe it did happen for real. Okay, now in such case, when you have a statement like this with no details, we read it, boom, and then we keep it moving. There's no details. Okay, the other, from the scholarly standpoint, would say this could be a scribal error. In other words, this was put in by the scholars, and that the scholars, so again, this statement is found in certain manuscripts and then not found in other manuscripts. And the ones that manuscripts that is found in, it was translated into the English in terms of our language. No big deal. But with this one is a little different, is because we could say the context, the story here, even if you take out the story of the angel coming down, stirring the water from time to time, so you have this miraculous sign, and what appears to be the man himself saying that at some point there is some stirring of the water, he just can't get to it in time. So for 38 years, right? For 38 years, he's been paralyzed trying to get to this water that stirs from time to time. From the looks of it, they don't know when it's going to stir, but when it stirs, they got to be at the ready, boom, and they go in. He misses it every time. Now, here's what I wanted to say about this man, which is kind of interesting. So this man gets healed, and watch what happens. So Jesus asks him, do you want to get well? He says, well, nobody's able to put me into the water. Verse 8, get up, Jesus told him, pick up your mat and walk. Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Now, at this point, wouldn't you think the man would be grateful? Now, we're going to see another story in John chapter 9 where the man is grateful, where Jesus heals the blind man who was born blind. And the Pharisees tried their best to talk this man to denounce Jesus. And he go, I don't know what y'all talking about. This man healed me. I was blind. This is why you hear the kind of favorite kind of quote. I was blind and now I can see. That quote came because the Pharisees were trying to get this man to denounce Jesus. But look what happened with this man here, where he says right here, verse 8, pick up your mat and walk. And instantly the man got up well, picked up his mat and started to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, this is the Sabbath day. It is illegal for you to pick up your mat and walk. Now again, this is the Sabbath. It's going to be, I'm going to come back to the Sabbath later, because trust me, this is going to be one of their points. It's the Sabbath day, and they say you can't do no work on the Sabbath, and that's really what the whole Sabbath controversy is. So the question is, when the man picked up his mat, was he then breaking the Sabbath? I'll come back to this in the next study, but I wanted to finish here about the character of this man when he says, now the day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, this is the Sabbath. It is illegal for you to pick up your mat. Jesus replied, the man who made me well told me to pick up my mat and walk. Who is the man who told you pick up your mat and walk? They asked, but the man who was cured didn't know who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. After this, Jesus found him in the temple complex and said, see, you are well, do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you. The man went and reported it to the Jews. that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now, we'll come back to this issue about the Sabbath. But I want you to see what was even more astounding is that this man went and reported it to the Jews. Why? We're going to see other stories here in John that John's going to bring out, how people were afraid of the Pharisees. And why did this man feel the need to run back to the Pharisee and report it to him? That's the interesting thing to me. And remember, this man had been healed by Jesus. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.